Greetings, gamers. Tim here again. Maybe a little less enthusiastic than the first time I tried to record this video because my nose itched and I had to scratch it, and it's like I don't want that on camera. And I'm not great at editing these things, so they're pretty stream of conscious. Um, so my IBS has no apparent source. I went through the doctor, I went to the specialist, the gastroenterologist, and we did the camera and nothing. So I have no reason why my intestines suddenly decide to turn into a eel and chew its way out, but it does. I mean, it feels that way. But the pain on that, I now have to move it down a few notches. Because originally, I would put it at an 8 or a 9 on the worst day, the absolute worst day. Now, that's the worst days. But now I have a new replacement because my scale has been switched back, and that's pushed down a little bit. And that is, I have an ingrown toenail. And the doctor not wanting to do, the actual procedure, first off, go in there and cut it out and make sure everything is fine. He instead told me how to do it at home. So I did that. And eventually part of the nail breaks off and it stops hurting for 2 days. Then it comes back. I go to the doctor. The doctor said, well, it looks like it's healing. It looks like it's better. 2 days after I see the doctor, my pain is a 10 on my scale. I've only once had a pain of 10 on my scale before, like comparatively, and now I have a new 10 that's recent rather than the one I had when I was 8. And it was with the ingrown toenail, and I could not believe people had these and shrugged them off because that's how bad it was. I was in tears. I've had my nose broken. I've had my knee kicked sideways and almost passed out. I had a doors slammed on fingers. I've had doors, uh, car trunk door, the boot, as some people call it, fall on the finger and cut it. And I couldn't get the person who was in charge of the car to use the automatic thing to unlock it, and I couldn't from where I was. And I almost passed out, but that was from adrenaline and the fact I hadn't slept at all before the adrenaline spike went up and dropped. But I didn't fully pass out. I was semi-conscious. I just was so exhausted, my body went and fell over. The knee kicked in, didn't knock me out, but I did see stars. I always thought that was a joke. Never had actually seen stars before. Oh, now, on the other hand, I was crying. I have not cried over 99% of the physiological pain, physical pain in my body. I've suffered a lot, but I did have IBS that was slowly progressing toward something more significant in terms of pain. But now I have to move them down because compared to this ingrown toenail, which I don't want to really talk about, but I'm going to, it was a 10, this ingrown toenail. So I finally get a third doctor's appointment, and they say, okay, we have to do a procedure, but we have to check with your insurance. Come back tomorrow. So they didn't even put that visit to my insurance. They just like, no, can't do it today. Got to check with your insurance. Don't worry about it. We'll leave. We'll make a new appointment. Come back, and I'll have somebody do it, or I will do it. And the doctor is somebody I've dealt with before, but I couldn't quite remember his face because he had a, mask on because of COVID. And they go in there, and they're like, I don't see it. It doesn't look bad. And they cut. And then they're still looking at it because they're trying to figure out why it still hurts. Does this hurt? And they have numbed it with this stuff that's cold. I'm like, I've had ice directly held to me longer that was not as cold as this numbing agent they used. And they said, this is going to be a little cold. I'm like, have you ever had that done to you? Because it's a lot cold. But it didn't bother me. I mean, it really didn't. After it numbed, I was like, oh, thank you for that cold. That cold was great. That's wonderful. It didn't hurt. But they cut the little bit off that they thought was in there. And then they start poking at it. Does this hurt? Yes. Does this hurt? Yes. We just numbed it. I know. That's still hurting. So they're like, let us look. And they start looking, and they find an apparently completely separate toenail piece, not connected to anything, that is embedded in my toe. I don't know if it broke off and went in there. I don't know if it grew out on its own and was still attached and the new nail grew up over it. I don't know. I don't know. But they're like, we've never seen this before. Now, admittedly, the doctors I go to are the ones that my insurance will pay for, which the cheapest ones are third year interns who are almost ready to go out and practice, that are, doing their practicum. And so far, they have been some of the best doctors I have ever had because they're still interested in doing their jobs. They're not tired. They're not worn out. They're still, gung ho about it. But their boss was in the room with them, and she had not seen it before either. And her boss has been a doctor. Their boss has been a doctor for several years because she has students. And also, even the third year interns have slightly newer interns that they're teaching the day-to-day process of. But this one was like up there. And she's like, I've never seen that before either. And I'm like, I can't see them. So shaking my head is just imagining what she did. But they pull it out. It's still sore, but it doesn't hurt like it did. It's not making me cry. And I don't cry over most things. Now, pain-wise, I mean, literally 99% of my pain does not cause me to cry. Just occasionally. But that toenail did. The only other pain was when I was 8 and they did surgery in a very painful place and they wanted me to do something afterwards. And I kept saying, no, it hurt too much. And finally, this old nurse comes in, takes me off, and she goes, okay, I want you to sit right there. And I sat right there. And then what happened, happened. What was supposed to happen, happened. And it didn't hurt. And this is one of the reasons why I adore nurses. Because sometimes they have practical experience that doctors don't. Because they see us more often. Now, most of the other nurses didn't. The doctor didn't. They were still working on it. Have a solution for why it was so hurtful and why I couldn't do this thing. But I couldn't. And this older nurse solved it all. Just then she said, you're good. I'm good. Do we have to clean up the mess? No. That's not our job. Took me back to the bed, and I was discharged in a couple of days. But I tell you, there are some surgeries that are worse than others. Toenail removal, the surgery itself is not really a surgery, just, a little cutting and moving and whatever. Definitely didn't hurt. Didn't need injections in weird places. But I've been there and I've done that with all sorts of things. But I've only had the quote, 2 quote surgeries. I still have my tonsils. I still have my appendix. Almost 48 years old. Now, that leads to a topic of pain. And that's why I spent the first almost 10 minutes of this video, not quite, talking about physical pain. Because there's also emotional and psychological pain. There's an author that I love with their book, that there's a book of theirs I will not read because it has emotional context for me that makes me reading it unhappy. That is not the same thing as trigger. Emotional context that makes you unhappy is not a trigger. A trigger, and I have to explain this in more detail because I see people joke about it online. A trigger breaks down all of a person's emotional walls and reduces them to instinctual fight or flight and whatever is necessary to make the hurting stop reaction. For some people, like me, when I run across one of my triggers, I will cry. If it's a book, I will throw the book across the room. If it is a movie, I will turn off the movie and never watch it. I will probably still go and curl up in a ball and cry and try and hide. Because for me, my emotional reaction to something I physically cannot punch or kick or otherwise harm is flight, because there's no fight. There's nothing I can do about that emotional trigger. So my reaction is a flight response. And it is such a negative response that there was a point in time where I had this huge desk. I don't anymore, but I had this huge desk that folds up into a cabinet. I've got a similar one over here that was my parents that they don't use anymore because I no longer have a full computer. But I do. I don't do this on a laptop or a tablet. I do this on a sit-down big tower case computer. But the reason I want to bring up triggers is this person on my Facebook was talking about seeing a movie that they felt had serious emotional consequences for them. And they finally got what people meant when they said a trigger. They said they're afraid they're going to have nightmares. Now, they didn't turn the movie off. They didn't stop it and quit. They even talked about watching the movie again. So that's likely not a trigger. It's an emotional response. Now, I'm not belittling this person's actual feeling. Merely, I'm quite happy that they kind of now understand what a trigger actually is. Somebody who goes to a class that talks about things that are uncomfortable emotionally, that class is not triggering. If you could walk out of the room and say, oh, that triggered me, you were not triggered. If you run screaming out of the class, go to the bathroom, hide in it, curl up into, on top of a toilet and sob and cry and do that for an hour, that's probably a trigger. And I bring this up because a lot of people do not get this. And I want to point out specifically that this is a problem of people who have served in combat overseas. We call it PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. In World War II, it was called shell shock. But the fundamental reaction is they now have an adrenaline response when certain conditions occur. And the adrenaline response rewires their brain in such a way that when something similar occurs to the sounds of combat, loud noises, fireworks, thunder, they have a completely negative emotional reaction that is so extreme it can be dangerous. They can run over their spouse, running away. They may punch at somebody. They may shoot somebody if they have firearms. They may try and injure themselves. Not everybody who has a trigger has PTSD. I'm not diagnosed with PTSD, but I do have triggers. And they literally tear you down to the barest, most childlike reaction, which is crying, shaking, just having a physical reaction to a mental, emotional trauma. And seeing that in books is almost impossible to deal with for me. So I get spoilers for books. A lot of spoilers for books. Generally, movies I'm okay with because generally movies have ratings, and they will tell you kind of basically in ideas that there's likely to be a trigger in this. Violence isn't my trigger. I can deal with violence. I can't deal with certain other things. If that occurred in a movie, I'm leaving, turning it off, I'm ejecting it. If I paid for it, it will never be watched again. Probably be passed on to somebody who may appreciate it, even with that content. Books, if you understand my book treatment, I worked in a bookstore for years. They let you borrow books as long as you bring them back in the condition that they left the store in. And your boss has to check that. Whoever's your current person in charge has to check that. Assistant manager, whatever. And I would bring books back, And they were in such pristine condition. They go, "Did you read this?" Yes, I've read this entire book. But you're also talking about somebody who doesn't fold the book back, who doesn't turn pages down. And I'm like, I literally, there are no stuffed covers. There's no signs of any pressure being applied to open the book, because when I open the book, it gets open just far enough to read the word. It's never opened like this. It's almost always like this. And it's different with gaming books, with role-playing gaming books, because I sometimes have to reference them. So they're open like this a little bit. So I have more worn gaming books than I do novels and history books and folklore books and a number of other books that I read. But I still have some gaming books from the 80s, late 80s, some from the 90s that are still staple bound, still in relatively good condition despite multiple moves, despite their boxes decaying and falling apart, despite being used regularly. Now, I have some that are definitely really worn. I mean, they were obtained secondhand or they were something I lent to somebody else. I don't lend out books often for that very reason. I do have some books that I am the one that damaged over time because I used them that much. One of those a long time ago was the Ultimate Powers book from the Marvel role-playing game. It was used a lot in our game. Now, it wasn't just me using it, because it was only one of the copies that any of us had. So we would often, switch hands. And that's part of what caused the damage. And eventually the covers came off, and I had it put in the binder, because at the time they didn't have, rebinding for softcover books as common as it is now. But that's the point I'm trying to make, is a trigger makes my protective nature of books go away. As a creator, as a writer of role-playing games, my friends have asked me to sign their books. I have signed copies of role-playing games from other people. But when I am asked to put pen to paper on a book of my own, it is a painful experience for me. And I know my friends want this. I know my family wants this. But for me, it hurts because I don't like writing in books. Never have. There's one exception, and that is in a very specific kind of book that a lot of people do write in. And that particular book always has the exact same section marked by me in it, because it is by the basis of which a lot of things I base my life on occur. I'm not going to talk about it because that's what this video is not about. This video is talking about pain and the effects they have on people. If somebody is really triggered, most of the time they're not going to say anything. They're going to react. And that reaction will be an extreme negative reaction. Now, some people have milder triggers than others. So they might be able to talk about it, because I'm not going to tell somebody they're not triggered. But if that's the reason you drop a class, is because you feel a book is triggering, and you can put it in coherent terms, it probably wasn't as triggering as a real, true trigger is. That's somebody co-opting the word from real people who suffer triggering events. I have known people with PTSD. I've seen what triggering events do to them. I'm not diagnosed with PTSD, but I have triggering events, as I said. And they will keep me from reading a book from an author entirely, or reading that author sometimes, if it occurs often. I recently, because of this person watching that movie, and because I connected to an author, but I've never read her what you want to call magnum opus, her biggest, longest, most important shaping series of her career. And it's like 14 books long. It was incredibly popular when I worked in the bookstore. And I know the author's name. I'm like, when somebody says this book, I'm like, oh, that's that author. And they're like, you know it? Well, people have told me about it. They told me it's really good. I should read it. And I just never got around to it. And right now, I'm not in the mental state of reading fantasy. I mean, right now, I'm reading urban fantasy, science fiction, and superheroes, which all of that's speculative fiction. But you know what I'm saying now. But there are some books I will not read because of their content. because I know they have triggering content. And this author is one of the few authors who's added me back, as in I can directly message them. So I asked her, you have a fantasy series. It's somewhat common in fantasy series to have this triggering event. Do your books have it? And she answered. She took the time and said, yes. So be careful when you read these books. I don't want you to be upset by them. And I can usually get by as long as I'm pre-warned that there is likely to be that. But she told me specifically to not read one of her books that's part of the series, because it's not like you have to follow it, because it's not a series that has you have to read every book because you get the whole story. So I think she writes a whole story in each book, and they're a generational kind of saga. I'm not sure, because again, I haven't read them, but she was willing to warn me. That's important, especially when I consider her an extremely popular author. And it brought me to bring about triggers when I talked to this person online, went on my Facebook. And when I talked to her, it's one of the reasons I asked, because I'm like, hey, you added me back. I really, I'm a big fan, but I'm a big fan of her urban fantasy, which is a lot smaller. In fact, I was kind of worried that something bad had happened to her because she hadn't written in a long time, several years. But apparently, she's just had life like the rest of us, a complicated life that has, all sorts of problems. As for gaming, my Saturday face-to-face gaming is pretty much dead at the moment for a variety of reasons. COVID is not the entire reason, but, people work and some people don't work, and people haven't been feeling it. So, plus, the whole COVID thing. So I've been doing a lot more online gaming. Though I seem to miss one of my favorite games to run because something bad, like my toe, or just sinuses or something comes up that day, and it drives me nuts because I run it. It's one of my favorite games to run, and it is a powered by the apocalypse game called Far Flung. It is a very interesting space opera game in which you can play crazy character things, like really crazy things, from mass mines to world and maybe even star destroying machines. That, the universe is going to end anyway. I can wait. I don't have to destroy the universe right now. So I'm going to go have some adventure. And I mean, it's a great little space opera game that has a vast amount of flexibility and functionality and interesting mechanics. It's actually one of the more heavy rules versions of Powered by the Apocalypse games that I've interacted with. But I admit that my Powered by the Apocalypse game had been Dungeon World, Monster of the Week, and Far Flung. I think there's another one I played, but I'm not sure. My memory's not great. I'm old, and depression affects the memory. But I've had a lot of fun. My D&D game on Wednesdays face to face moved online, and that means I lost a player because they always eat with their family when they're home. I can't fault them for that. There's nothing wrong with that. I never have been the kind of person who wants to go eat with my family. I do it more often now because my mom's alone, except for me. I'm her caretaker. And I've been pushing for her to get the health treatment she needs for 7 years. My dad passed away in 2012, and I divorced in 2013, and so I moved back here. And I helped take care of my grandmother because she couldn't. She was still not functioning because of the loss of my dad. And I'm not a 100% functional human being as much as I'd like to be, which is why it takes me so long to write and create games, because there are just days I just can't. I just can't function. There are fewer, and there are less stresses than there used to be. But there are, of course, still stresses. But I wanted to address triggering and, Don't overuse it. Don't use it as an excuse. Don't use it because you're slightly emotionally distressed. Um, I can't fault the gentleman who used it, understanding triggering now because I've seen this movie. As long as he begins to understand it, that's a movement in the right direction. Because he said he's somebody who calls people basically bad names, uh, calls them weak and worse versions of that. And in person, I'd have punched him out. Seriously, if he said those things to me in real life. But he said this movie helped him understand it. He's on the iceberg tip. It goes way down under the water. Because for those of us who've had triggers, we know how deep it can be, how painful it can be. And there are a lot of people who suffer, not just veterans. People who've experienced a lot of negative emotional events. People who have suffered traumatic experiences like the loss of a child early. People who have suffered some of the things I've suffered, which is exactly why I have triggers. And there are books I won't read. As long as, especially if I'm made aware that it has triggers, I will avoid it completely. My triggers. Now, again, I had a book that caused emotional distress, but that's not the same thing. I just don't read that book because it distresses me. It's not a trigger. It's not, I'm done with this author. I still enjoy that author. I read most of his books up until the most recent, like 4 or 5, because he just keeps writing. And I will admit the last book I read by him was kind of infuriating. And this is Stephen Brust, by the way, his Derek series. And the book that bothers me was the one where his wife divorces him and her reason, literally lack of any obvious reasons. And I understand now why, because he reveals that in the last book I read. But I was literally at the last book I read, okay, I understand why she did it. She didn't want to manipulate him, but she still manipulated him fundamentally and didn't tell him the truth, a truth he deserved to know. So I'm literally this person who's like, murder her, kill that character. She deserves to die. So I really don't want to read the rest of his book now because I don't take that lion hard stance on the character, even the bad guys most of the time in a book. And I mean, one of my favorite books is Villains by Necessity, which is a bunch of villains who basically are the only bad guys left in the world and have to go save the world from good because good is literally mind controlling people to make them good. And that's not something I agree with. That doesn't not you once you remove that choice, you're no longer good in my eyes. Because I still think you should have the choice between, if there is an absolute good and an absolute evil, you should have your choice of which direction you're going to be, or if you're going to walk a middle line, whatever. And in fantasy, there often is an absolute good and absolute evil. But that absolute good wrapped itself around to absolute evil when it started forcing people to be good. And it's a fun fantasy novel. It is very fun. But some of the characters are just, you find out they have these horrible backstories. And that's why they're evil. And, fundamentally, it kind of humanizes the evil character. It's a funny book. And they do have a spy for good with them who's just horrified by the things they do and things they're willing to do. Just completely horrified. He tells the person who sent him to spy on them is like, oh no, I can't deal with this. They're just too evil. And it's hilarious because it examines that the real world doesn't work like a fantasy book. And the choices you make doesn't necessarily mean turns you into an absolutely evil person. And it's a very good novel for breaking down that absolute evil and absolute good trope. The quest of the evil guys to save evil. And it's a wonderful book, just like the Goblin series. I can't remember. Goblin Quest is the first one. I can't remember the author's name. And I will know it as soon as I stop this video. But they are great books because you run into this goblin, you find out people get killed by the goblins, and the good guys really aren't all that good. They're actually kind of jackasses. They're really not good guys at all. They think they are, but they're not. They're more evil than the people they're invading. Because they're literally invading their homes. But that's the thing. As a gamer, it's like I like to see both perspectives, both absolute good and absolute evil in some games, and the lack of absolute evil, the gray, in some games and some books. And I like it when you can look at the both sides, and I like when there's that gray in the middle. But I also like superheroes who are fundamentally good guys, who do the right thing, and that Superman, Captain America. Captain America stands for our ideals of America, not what America actually is. But I love that representation of that character when he's written that. When he represents the greatest ideals of all Americans, white, black, brown, Chinese. I mean, I don't care. I use color and I shouldn't have. African American, uh, Hispanic, Latino, because they're not always the same thing. By the way, Latino generally means they come from Latin America. Hispanic means they descend from Spaniards. While there's a lot of mixing because the Spaniards were early colonizers who did terrible things to the people they ran into, just like the white colonizers did terrible things to the people they ran into. And I consider myself white, for the record, if it's not obvious to you, I'm a white guy, but I do try and respect the different skin colors humans have, the different cultural experiences they have. And I try and make things not exact stand-ins for real-world cultures in my fantasy games. Although some people have implemented that for their characters in games, where I've given them some leeway, not always my intent, my personal intent, to make them map to any real-world um, nationality or culture or anything of the sort. Although I do have some nations in some settings that I play with that resemble these things. They're not always these. They're not always exact, and they're not always share all the cultural experiences. In my game High Valor, for example, the dwarves seem very Norse. They're very Norse in inspiration. Their names are taken from Norse inspiration, but their culture, and I don't touch upon it in High Valor itself because I wanted other people to flesh it out for their setting. If they want to take it way Norse, they can. If they want to take it less Norse, they can. But they have very specific ideals and ideas. And the elves don't have a culture. It's literally a culture of super individuality, where two really old elves have two entirely different cultures they grew up from because they literally start individualizing themselves once they reach adulthood. And so they may not even speak the same language anymore, because literally the version of whatever version of elf they speak, the the language is different. Has different iodines. Has been individualized to on an individual scale. So the elves don't resemble anything in my fantasy setting. I mean, they come all across being a little Celtic, but they're not. Just like the humans are inspired by both Frankish and Anglo-Saxon and Celtic and Norse. They're inspired by a whole bunch of different things in the real world, but fantasy. They're their own thing. They follow the trope of a lot of Arthurian and fiction around Charlemagne because those were big inspirations. But so was Beowulf, which may predate the Anglo-Saxon culture, which is something I learned recently. Because I always thought it was our earliest example of Anglo-Saxon, stories being written down, but it may be older than that. And that's wonderful. That's fascinating. I wonder what culture it was created. Was it Norse? Was it not? Who knows? But we don't yet. And that's one of the things I like is always discovering things about our ancestors that we didn't know. And though I mentioned that I am white, my twice great grandfather was Cherokee. And like that matters because I'm not Cherokee. I'm a white guy. Just because I have an ancestor that came from that culture and was pretty much colonialized. It gives me a little bit more sympathy for those who have suffered under the colonization of this country we live in. For both sides. Because, there's no guarantee that the rest of my ancestors had anything to do with the colonization. They may have come over here after most of that had happened, for all I know. I know where they come from, and they're mostly Northern European, the British Isles. In fact, the British Isles is literally on my ancestry thing twice. Uh, and they separate out, like, oh, you're from the British Isles and you're from North, this part of Europe, and it circles. But then again, that's ancestry, which is mostly fun. It's not actually factual scientific data for sure yet. Maybe someday you'll get there, but at the moment, it's questionable. But I do know that my second great grandfather is Cherokee because he is shown on the census at a time when he would not have been allowed to call himself white, because if he had, he would have been in great trouble. Does that show up in my ancestry bloodline at all? No. So I really don't count. I'm not close enough related. And they trace their line matrilineally, not patrilineally, even though my ancestry from that comes from my mom. But I have Scottish ancestry on both sides of my biological father and my biological mother. So, yay. But also, apparently, according to ancestry, I have a little bit of Norwegian. So imagine it was the Vikings that sent over a war band, and the war band went to Scotland. But boy, there are a lot of redheads here, and we really like redheads, so we'll take them back. Or, we'll just have sex with them here, whatever. Again, a version of colonization. Not always with the Norse, was it invasions and battles, and they weren't all Vikings. Sometimes they were just traders, which, is, we portrayed them so long as one thing that they're not entirely. Like, we portray them as a very patriarchal culture, and yet many other warriors were women. Oh, guess what, patriarchy? You need to stop doing that. But the problem is we didn't know the truth, and Western European society is based primarily for many, many centuries on a very patriarchal standard that has continued to carry forward. But that's beginning to unwind here in modern America, in modern Europe. It's changing. Not changing in some other countries. And whether that's good or bad, I can't say. I like equality. I think we should all have equal rights, and that doesn't matter your skin color. That doesn't matter your nation of origin. It doesn't matter your cultural beliefs. Doesn't matter your religious beliefs. You should have the right to be treated equally under the law, under the government, under whatever we call a society we live in. And, this really shouldn't be radical. This is the 21st century, and it should not be radical to say something that we should be equal and treated equally. But it is. It's still a radical idea, and it really shouldn't be. But, I respect a lot of people. I respect a lot of people whose skin colors do not match mine. I respect a lot of people whose religions do not fit mine. I have a lot of respect for people who literally claim to be the opposite religion that I am. But I have respect for them because of the way they pursue their equality. And then I have some that differ that just, I am in a small town. And you know what the second most common religion is in the state of Texas? Islam. Islam. That's the second most common religion after Christianity. And a lot of that's because there's a lot of small towns. And a lot of that is we have a similar environment, especially out here in the west part of the state, a similar environment to where they've been from. And also, bigger cities tend to want white doctors. And that's as racist as it can get, in the world we live in. That is not the worst racist thing that can happen, but that is a very racist mind point. I have had doctors who are second generation Lebanese Americans, second generation Chinese Americans, first generation, literally they came over here, Indian from India. I have had some from Nigeria. I have had some from all over Africa. Some of the pharmacists I run into have interesting accents, and about two-thirds of them have been Nigerian. But Nigeria is a big country. And it's fascinating because it's a big country, and we think we're big, and you look at Nigeria, and it's like, Africa's way bigger than the United States, way bigger. And Nigeria is only one country in Nigeria. And it's interesting, though, because I ran into a pharmacist who had an accent, and I couldn't place it. I really couldn't place it. Her skin is whiter than mine. And I said, "Where are you from?" "Oh, Arizona," with her accent. I'm like, "Okay, no, let me ask you, where's your ancestors most recently from?" And she's like, "I've never been asked where my ancestors from." I just said, "Well, you have an accent, a little bit of one. And it's not West Texas. It's not East Texas. It's not what I would associate with an Arizonan, somebody from Arizona. Not sure what you want to be called, but Arizonan. Um, so forgive me if I get that wrong." Um, but she said, "Oh, South Africa." I'm like, "Oh, that explains the accent." And I mean, that's as far as a conversation gets. I'm incredibly curious about people's nationalities and backgrounds. But I had a doctor come in who was Muslim. I had this doctor come in, and he was looking at a problem that I had, and I wanted to verify that within the tenets of his faith, he was okay working on the part of me he was working on. And he said, "Oh, that's personal stuff. It does not apply to business stuff. Is that a problem?" I said, "Oh no, not at all. I don't care what religion you are. As long as you're a doctor, I'm good." Because I don't care skin color, religion, whatever you want to define race as. Because really, it's just a little bit different from melanin. And sometimes culture, because we have different cultures that have evolved over the years. But that's not what people are worried about as much. They're worried about your skin color. And I don't have that issue. I'm more than happy to have somebody of purple, green, orange, yellow, really yellow. I mean, like, uh, let me give an example. This color yellow, the lid of this bottle yellow, because I don't consider Chinese people yellow. But we've heard of them as the yellow menace and the yellow peril. I'm like, they're not yellow. You're darker skinned, but you're not yellow. Uh, but we as a nation, and I'm going to add this little bit here at the end if you've listened to this long, because this is one of my longer. We as a nation need to outgrow the idea of skin color as mattering for anything, gender as mattering for anything. I don't care whether you're male, female, transgender, agender, non-binary. Uh, I don't care. None of these things have impact on me personally. I want you to live a happy, wonderful life. That's what I want for those people. All those people. That's what I want for people watching my videos. I want you to have a happy, wonderful life. I want people who look like me Well, maybe not exactly like me. Very few people have eyebrows like this that are like dead caterpillars landed on my face. But uh, I want people to be happy and healthy and whatever. Like I have this little tree. My mom bought this for me as a gift. It's a bonsai, and I think it's dying. Bless its heart. And I just got it. I've had it a little over a week now. I think I got it on Monday. Uh, Today, Saturday. Well, not this Monday. Maybe not even that. Maybe Thursday or Friday. But it's lost a lot of leaves. It's lost a lot of flowers. Um, it was listed as non-flowering. It is what it's flowering. But the only thing I can figure out is um, that it may have some sort of pest in it. Because I found a hole, and even though it's a tree, it really shouldn't have a kind of hole like that. Because there are no owls going in there or woodpeckers going in there. It's a tiny tree. Um, but I've been watering it as I'm supposed to because it's supposed to be kept. It's soil moist. I've been talking to it, which I know people think is insane, but I've been talking to it. Talk to my dog. I mean, come on, my dog at least understands me. I don't know if the tree understands me, but my dog does. I ask her to show me where something is, and most of the time she will. What she wants, she'll try anyway. Sometimes it's to go out. Sometimes it's to go to her food. She'll go look at the food container where her food is stored, but sealed because she will eat the bag if I leave it in the bag. Sometimes she looks at the microwave because that's where certain things get put to keep them safe. Because we know she's opened the cabinet, but she also a Great Dane. She usually doesn't bother the lower cabinets. It's usually the higher cabinets, but that's where we store food she would be interested in. Things like bread and dog cookies and things like that. But I want the tree to be happy. I want my dog to be happy. I want people to be happy. Uh, I want our environment to be happy. I want our culture as Americans to be happy. But the only way we can be happy in this country is if we stop making race an issue, stop making different cultures an issue. I mean, because we just can't. We have to welcome people. We have to get along. We have to live together. I mean, there are certain cultures that we can't get along with because, if you're a cannibal, we can't really, no, we just can't get along with each other. I'm sorry. I don't taste good. I promise you. Um, promise you. I'm too much fat and not healthy. But, basically, what I'm saying is at the end of all this, I write games to be fun. I write games to be entertainment. But I also choose the cover. I choose the art when I can to be representative. The cover of Hearts and Souls, the first edition, black man on the cover. Second edition, it won't have a black man. It will have a Native American, Hispanic, Latin American woman. It's kind of all of that at once. But she comes from that kind of background. But she's also a character I write up. I didn't write up Dr. Velocity in the original game because I didn't give much of a setting, just an idea of one. But I felt that people building their own settings was important. And now I'm putting tools in the game to build their own setting, but also a setting of its own so that you can just, here's a setting, let's go. But that setting has superheroes of all different colors and all different kinds. The first superhero in that comic book universe was African American. Why? Because I can write a fictional comic book universe written by a fictional comic book company in a fictional alternate reality that does not have a stick up their ass about such things. Because there are firemen and there are policemen, there are EMTs, who are Islamic, who are Christian, who are atheists, who are black, who are African American, if you prefer that term. Sorry, I grew up with the word of the color. And it's hard to break, and I have been trying. I do it in my writing, really try. Uh, I may be first generation immigrant, I may be second generation immigrant, I may be 100th generation immigrant. My ancestors were immigrants to this country for the most part, like 98% of them. One of mine was from Germany. My great grandmother was from Germany, or her grandmother. I don't know if she was first or second generation. I know it was relatively soon, but it was before World War One, well, I believe. So it wasn't even World War Two timing. It might have been before World War Two, and between after World War One, I don't know. I just don't have that much data on that side of the family. Which is why I'm trying to get my mother to help me, track down this stuff. But because she knows all those stories, but she always wants to tell me about some cousin, distant cousin that I've never met. I have no idea who he is. I'm like, I can't put that in the tree, Mom. That's way too far away. But she wants to tell me stories about them. I just want to know, how are they related to us? Where do they go in the tree? But the fact of the matter is, we have to learn to respect each other in this country, to love each other in this country. And yeah, I have a religion. I mentioned that before. And there are people that disagree with my religion, and that's okay. They have that right. They deserve that right because that's what this nation was built. Just like we should respect the ideals of people who came after our founders, because our founders were racist as sin, and almost every single one of them. And we need to grow above that, especially if you're a person of faith, of any faith. If your faith puts humans first as mattering in their lives, if they are important, then it's all humans. And that to me is how religion should be. In my faith, you don't have to follow it. It's a version of Christianity. But in my faith, in that version of Christianity, I'm friends with lots of people who are not Christian, who are atheists, who are Wiccans, who are pagans of some sort that I don't know the name of. Some may be Asatru or Asatru, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, who worship the old Norse Viking ways. I've known a few Satanists. And that's the antithesis of Christianity, but they're not exactly, at least not the specific kind of Satanists I have dealt with. Most of them are just a form of atheists who just want equal rights in this country. I wish they had a little more downplay of their cultural faith, because that statue that they want to put up in courtyards and stuff, Christians aren't putting a big cross with nailed Jesus on it everywhere. They may want to, but we're not. Or at least we're only putting down the Ten Commandments. Which, generally speaking, the least offensive of the Christian imagery we could use. We could put an angel who's just a swirling circle of eyes up there. But, I can't fault them for their reasons of wanting their statue up there. Even though I can question their taste a little bit for that particular statue. But to be fair, it should be their right to put that statue up. As a Christian, I believe that. As an American, I believe that. Because this nation was not founded for just Christians. Our forefathers weren't even Christians per se. They were deists. Look it up. And they were still racist. They still believed they were superior. Many of them still had slaves. And that is a horrific, horrific thing that we inflicted upon people. No, we weren't the only ones. The British, the Dutch, the French, they were responsible for slavery too. And so were some Africans. There were lots of African slave owners before white people got there. And you can't say that wasn't horrific then. You can't say it's not horrific now. But those people are, for the most part, free, but they're not equal under a lot of people's eyes. Am I afraid of African Americans? No. My next door neighbor is African American. My backyard neighbor is uh, Hispanic. He sends stuff to his brother in Mexico. Stuff that, like rusted old pipe that can be used and reused for something like fencing. It can be cleaned up because there are sections of it that are still good, but it can't be used for what it's original. And that man, sweetheart. The rest of his family, I don't know. Although I think his daughter or granddaughter, teenager now, she was very. When we had a shooting in this area, I checked on both those houses because I've had conversations with those people, and I wanted to make sure they were okay. Because I didn't know the reason for the shooter in this area. I didn't know if it was race driven or not. But I worried about them because they're my neighbors who I know. I used to know more neighbors down the street. I don't anymore. Of course, I had a lot to do with social anxiety. But at the end of the day, color of skin, race, shouldn't matter. We should be above that, every single one of us. And it's shameful. It's shameful. And I know my local sheriff had a picture of him holding up a picture of somebody he's a white man. He had a picture, our chief of police. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they're called because the sheriff's out west of town and the chief of police here. Not a lot of difference. But he was holding a picture of a black man at the protest who had been killed by police. Maybe he did it because it's political. Maybe he did it because he earnestly believes that it's wrong. I hope it's the latter. But even if it's the former, he stood there. He stood there with that picture with those protesters. It was a peaceful protest. They didn't turn into a riot because it wasn't pushed upon people. People weren't pushed away from the police station. They were welcome to be there as a protest. And cry. I'm about to cry. But I'm tired. I'm worn out. Don't want to buy my games. Don't want to buy my books. Don't. Don't want to watch my videos. Don't. Don't want to comment. Want to make a negative comment. Don't. Don't bother. I'm not going to change my view. All men are created equal. And even if my forefathers didn't believe that, I do. All women are created equal. Genesis says that. I don't mean the version with Adam. I mean the one that comes before that. God made man and woman in his image. So yes, I've gone religious finally on this video after an hour because I just kept rambling until I got there. So if you believe in God, he created man and woman in his own image, then we're all built in his image. And that means women too. Which means his image is way more flexible than you're allowing for. Now, I personally believe that means our souls are spirits. But that applies to every soul, every spirit, no matter what. And all I can do is try and be a good person, show love to everybody that I can. I try to. People I come in contact with. I had to have a doctor's appointment with my psychiatrist over the phone because of COVID. And I said, "How you doing? Are you all right?" I checked on her mental health in reverse. She said she's tired of working at home. She wants to go back to her office. Um, and she's been a good doctor for me. But I checked on them. I checked on my comic book store people when they first, shut down, and they had the number up to call if you wanted to drive by and pick up your comic, or if you wanted to, give them a card to put on file to discharge you and let you come pick them up later. Uh, Checked on them and there was a shooter. So, pretty equal, all things considered about things. Is everyone perfect? No. Am I perfect? No. You can tell by my slips mentioning skin color in this video. I am not perfect. It was the generation I was raised in to refer to them that way. At least I didn't use my grandmother's language, and I'm trying to improve from there. I can't take it as an excuse. I made the mistake. I'm fixing it. I'm not going to reshoot this video. I'm going to share it so you understand where I made my mistakes. Because I made them. They're mine. And whether that's how I grew up or not does not mean that's how I should proceed from here. I wasn't raised really racist. In fact, the first African American person I knew was in preschool at church. And I was so happy because I called him a chocolate boy. Because that's what my little child brain was like, chocolate. Yes, that's wonderful. So, it's hilarious now as an adult. Gosh, what was I saying? But the fact is, I was genuinely happy and excited about that. I would be happy and excited about that fact today. I'd be happy anybody comes. As long as they're not gun wielding, as long as they're happy and generally there. I have lesbians in my church and gay people. I'm happy they're there. I love them. They're wonderful, sweet people. I don't know that I have any transgender people. I don't know if I'm non-binary or agender or asexual or any of the other LGBTA plus squad group. But those aren't necessarily questions that come up. I know it cost us a parishioner. I wasn't there that day. I kind of wish I was because I would have opened the door for him and said, "Don't let the door hit you on the way out." Because I'm not that kind of Christian. Leviticus isn't laws built for me. Christ is the one who built laws. I can respect Judaism. I love Jewish people. I love practitioners of the Jewish religion, even if they weren't born Jewish. I have friends who are Jewish. I have one who's just learning about Judaism now for themselves. And that's fantastic. Even as a Christian, I can respect somebody else's path. Because at the end of the day, I'm not God. I'm not Christ. I have no ability to judge anyone. No right to explicitly. I do make mistakes. I have done so. I have judged people before. And the only people I tend to still judge are people who have done horrible things to me directly in person. I'm online, but in person. But here's the thing at the end of the day. For me, try and love as many people as I can and accept everyone. Or maybe not mass murderers, as I said, cannibals. Maybe not the people in that little tiny island who threw spears at a plane, or the idiot who, even though that island was off limits to people, tried to go do missionary work. No, dude. Missionary work is trying to find people who are listening. It's missionary work is not trying to take your religion to a group of people who don't even want you there. No, that's not it. You want to share it with people who are questioning. Share it with people who are asking, who are willing. Colonialism had a lot to answer, and that shoving our religion down people's throats is one. Anyway, I've meandered for an hour now. If you have made it through this video, bless you. May you have a wonderful life. May you find happiness and joy, and hopefully, you will be able to see things as wonderfully as I do, despite all the pain I've been through, despite all the suffering I've been through, despite the fact that I have been put in situations where I would rather die than live because of what happened to me. But I have found joy in sharing my love for other people. Not perfect, make mistakes. Sometimes there are things I can't control too, like my depression. I have only the control of the medication it gives me. Not fun, not happy, but I'm a lot better than I used to be. I'm proud of myself for both sticking it out with a counselor, sticking it out with a doctor, trying so many medications. Oh gosh, you have no idea. I may not be able to put it in 100, but it's definitely up to there. Maybe not quite, but it's in the high range of taking different medications just to see what works until we found this weird combo. And getting enough counseling to make the ability to function stick at least a little bit. Still not perfect, still not there, still working on it. Maybe someday I will be there, and never have this problem again. But until then, I'm going to take those medications. And my dog has decided that it's time to end the video. She's talking to me. I think she wants to go outside. You want to go outside? Oh, yeah, you do. She's coming to join us. Oh, not there. Yeah. So, bye. Peace. Good gaming. Say hi, Gracie. Can you say hi? Oh, hi. Oh, get down. That's a lot of dog, guys.